Hey everyone, this is just a quick video to finish our conversation about kinship, marriage, all of that kind of stuff, family, right? We had left off talking about these kinship systems. As I said in class, it was something that we were really obsessed with, and using them and things like that. We don't really obsess over them quite so much anymore, but they are very, very useful tools, as I explained, because it can help you understand the interconnectedness of the individuals, one, through things like kinship terms. So, for example, we were looking at what was called the Iroquois kinship system, right? Where there's a couple of people maybe that you call mom, there's a couple people that maybe you call dad. Again, that gives you insights into their communities because individuals that have the same kinship term have the same relationship to you, right? This is why, for example, you'll sometimes see these like dumb internet quiz things that will say stuff like, in Mandarin, there's no word for brother. That's technically true in Hindi, Bengali, several other languages, because you're going to have a word for older brother and a word for younger brother, right? Why do they have different terms? Because you have different relationships to them. An older brother gets to tell you what to do, is basically going to always be kind of a backup parent. A younger brother, you get to tell them what to do, right? They can't tell you what to do because they're younger. And so you have different terms for them because you have a different relationship to them. You have a different responsibility, you have a different everything, right? So kind of writing these things down when you're living with the people, working with a culture can help. It can also help you understand like some of the economic dynamic of things and stuff like that. The family that I lived with in Mexico, for example, I kind of it's a long story, but I drew out their kinship system and had them help me with it. And it was only once I did that that I realized that the youngest daughter, who was like 22, 23 at the time, and not married, which was kind of uncommon. Like that's you usually it was a very rural village in southern Mexico, and so usually a young woman's going to get married way before that. But I realized maybe one, and her family was like, no, 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 we don't want her to get married. And I realized why. It was actually because she had other siblings living in the United States who were sending money home, which at the time was, it's called remittances. At the time, Mexicans living in the United States and sending money to their family was either the third or fourth largest source of GDP in Mexico. And this woman was this youngest sister, this youngest child was actually taking care of all of her nieces and nephews so that her family, so that her siblings could live in the United States and do that. And so if she went off and got married and started a family of her own, they would no longer be able to count on that revenue, right? So that's one of the reasons, that it can just help you kind of understand what you're looking at here, right? Now, this also came up last time we were talking about marriage, and I said about first cousins, because if you will notice on that Iroquois kinship system, some people are brother and sister, and some people are cousin, even though they're all what we would call first cousins. One of the reasons why you need to distinguish that is also because of the incest taboo. You can't marry your brother and sister, but you can marry your cousin. And before you're like totally grossed out and that's insane, honestly pick up basically any holy text from any religion. The Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Quran, you name it, and you're going to realize that not only was cousin marriage quite common, it was often preferred, right? Excuse me. Again, as we talked about before, it has to do with inheritance, stuff like that. And I know in the Judeo-Christian tradition, if you read the Bible or the Torah, you'll realize that it was sororal polygyny, first cousin marriage, meaning that it was quite common that you would marry your first cousin, right? But you would often marry sisters who were first cousins as well, right? All of this was very, very common in the Bible, right? This is something that all of us, most of us, I should say, most of us here have a cultural tradition that goes back to, right? So, yeah, yes. All right, so to continue talking about marriage here a little bit, um, This is the probability of first marriage by a specific age among men and women um, in the United States from '06 to 2010. As you can see, it is, women tend to get married a little bit younger than men do, right? So, yeah. Uh, Another statistic I want to show you really quick is the fact that probability of first marriage, like basically the age of when we are getting married is going down, right? Or excuse me, is going up. I apologize, I said that backwards. We are waiting longer to get married, and a lot of people sort of question this. But I mean, honestly, there's a ton of research that makes it really clear why. Our grandparents' generation, you could get a great career with a high school education. That's not the case anymore. As you guys well know, because you're sitting here with me, you need a college education now to be successful. You got to have a bachelor's degree, and more in many fields, you need a master's degree now. That is certainly true of most things in the social sciences, I can tell you, whether it be anthropology, psychology, sociology, history, even education. All of my friends who are teachers, and I have a number, started out with a bachelor's degree, and all of them now have a master's, right? I'd say a lot of my friends who are nurses, started out with a bachelor's degree in nursing. Used to, you could start out with an ASN, an associate's, a 2 years degree. We were the last college in the state to finally convert that to a bachelor's degree. I don't know why, because the writing was on the wall. Hospitals were no longer hiring people with 2 year degrees. You had to have a 4 year degree. And now, if you want to move up into like management and stuff, you got to have a master's, right? So, because of this, I think we're waiting longer to get married, right? We need more education. It's taking longer to establish ourselves. Obviously, the housing market plays a role in this too. We see there is data to indicate that, like, when the housing market goes crazy, like it just did, people don't get married as much, right? Because you're just not stable. You're not economically kind of set up, that kind of thing, right? Excuse me. There is another thing that we see is the probability that a marriage will remain intact, meaning will they get divorced, at 20 years, at the 20-year mark, will they be divorced based on like race and ethnicity? Asians and Hispanics in the United States are most likely to stay together. They're least likely to divorce, right? Followed by whites and followed by Black Americans, right? Again, there's a lot of reasons for this. Some of it is cultural. And I know that I'm being very broad and stereotyping groups here. And as an anthropologist, I don't really like to do it, but when you do these big data sets where you have like thousands of people, it's kind of difficult not to. But in a lot of Asian cultures, not all, a lot of Asian cultures, there's a big taboo against divorce, right? In India, China, in Japan, and there's depending on your religious background and your affiliations, it's really considered wrong, and things like that. Hispanics, again, I don't mean to stereotype, but if you're talking about people that are coming from Central and South America, they are overwhelmingly Catholic. Like the least Catholic country in Latin America is, I think, Chile. And the last time I looked, they're like 88% Catholic or something, right? So it is a stereotype, but it's not entirely inaccurate. And of course, if you're Catholic, it's considered wrong to get divorced. So that's part of the reason. Some of the other reasons that we see here in the United States is poverty, right? If you are living in poverty, you are more likely to get divorced, right? Um, and so, for example, like if you broke this down by income, it looks very, very different for whites and blacks as well. Things like incarceration have a huge, impact on that. And again, we have incarcerated more of our population than any developed nation on earth. I think the only people that have us beat are like North Korea and like some other just creepy dictatorship are like the only ones that have a higher percentage of their population behind bars. That's a massive disruption, right? And so a lot of times people are like, look, you're going to be gone for 25 years. And if I'm 30 years old, it's like, no, sorry, we're not staying together. you know. So there's a lot of reasons that sort of drive that component. But another thing that we're seeing, right? So current married and cohabiting status among women over many years, 82, 95, 2002, and then this latest grouping of 2006, 2010. On the higher side there, that is married status for the first time, right? Obviously, it's going down, right? The likelihood that women get married is going down. You know, I think there's probably a lot of reasons for this. Not the least of which is better gender equality. You know, there's an argument that that's one of the reasons why some groups of people are kind of like against women working and saying like women should be at home. It's because they're less likely to get married and they're more likely to get divorced if they're not financially dependent on a man. If they're independent, right? If they, you know, earn their own money, they don't have to put up with as much BS, right? Likewise, cohabiting has gone up significantly from 1982 to this latest period, you know, from 3% up to 11%. That's a pretty big jump, you know. We are more likely to live together without getting married. There's a lot of debate about that, about what it means, is it good, stuff like that. You will hear one statistic quoted quite often, which is true, that if you live with someone before you get married, you are more likely at 5 years to be broken up than to get married to them, right? Now, some people say that's why you should not live with someone because it before you get married because it's more likely the relationship will end. Other people point out, though, that as cohabiting, living together, not married, has become more common and more socially acceptable, maybe the reason is because, hey, yeah, I did move in with my partner, and after 2, 3 years living together, I realized, like, I'm not happy with this person, and we don't want the same stuff, and we don't have the same lifestyle, and we don't have the same habits. It's time to end this before I get into a marriage where I will also be dissatisfied. Right. So kind of a difference in perspective. Right. There's a few more things I want to hit, but so this is the Eskimo kinship, and again, I know that Eskimo is a very inappropriate word. I'm using it because it is what was used forever. It's what you will often see in anthropology textbooks. Today, the people are called Inuit, and it is not really appropriate to use that term. But this is what yours will kind of look like, your assignment to make a kinship chart of your own. Um, you can do this on Word. There's services online. I have a link to something. You can do this by hand, take a picture of it or scan it, but it better be very nice. I will not accept it if it's like free drawn and the lines are all squiggly and stuff. Get out a ruler, get out the compass, the little plastic thing that lets you draw a circle perfectly. I don't want no freehand blobs on there, you know, that kind of thing. Remember, I want kinship terms on there. I want kinship terms. And you need a key to tell me who and what and that kind of thing, right? You will maybe have to get creative on this. So, for example, were your parents or your aunt and your uncle never married? Well, that equal sign is marriage, but is it the same thing if they've just been together for 23 years? Right? Legally, they're not married, they're just cohabiting. So maybe you do like a different color equal sign, or maybe you do maybe you do like the wavy equal sign, like they do in math, you know? All right. Again, like, you know, people always ask me, it's like, well, my dad used to be married. Okay, is that person family to you? Is that kin to you? And they go, no. I go, then you don't put them on the kinship chart. My father has been married 3 times, and he was married to a woman, his second wife, who had a few kids. And I literally only met them like twice when I was a kid, right? And then they got divorced, and my dad got married a third time. I would never put them on there. They're not my step siblings. I honestly have a hard time remembering their names, you know, because I was like 7. You know, I saw them 2 or 3 times. They're not family to me, right? So it may require a little bit of, you know, ingenuity and massaging and trying to figure things out. Maybe you have a cousin that had a kid and they never got married. So instead of drawing an equal sign and then that descent line coming down to the kids, the line maybe just needs to come only from your cousin, right? Or maybe you have a blended family where, your aunt and uncle don't have kids together, but they have kids separately. Okay, so then maybe draw a line with the aunt's kids just from her and a line from your uncle and the kids just from him. Whatever it is, right? And I want you to remember to label those cross and parallel cousins because it's important you know who you can marry. All right, so the last couple of things that I want to talk about here is really about childbirth and pregnancy and things like that. Just because, we're talking all about marriage and stuff like that. Well, guess what marriage usually leads to? Babies, right? So let's talk about that a little briefly here, right? I study humans. We got to study where new humans come from. Nearly half of all pregnancies in the United States are not planned, which should probably tell you about the abysmal state of the sex education in our country. If young people or middle-aged people are, getting pregnant when they don't want to, it means they're not practicing safe sex. They're not using contraceptive devices properly, those kinds of things, right? So that's not good, right? But it is also important to know that an unplanned pregnancy is not the same thing as an unwanted pregnancy, right? My daughters are 18 months apart. So my oldest was 9 months when my wife at the time got pregnant with our second daughter. That was not planned. It was absolutely wanted, right? And so there's a difference. There is a difference, and that's important. Currently, about 7% of American couples are voluntarily childless, as we say, or child-free, right? Um, More and more people are just deciding that they don't want to do that. And again, there's been this kind of weird narrative lately. I probably shouldn't say it's new, but that implies that if somebody decides not to have children, they're selfish or they're crazy or they're problematic or they're something. And I don't understand that because I have a number of friends, my best friend actually, he's 2 years older than me. He's never going to have kids. He does not want them. He never wanted them. I don't see a problem with this in a world where a sad number of parents are either overtly abusive or um, passively neglectful, right? I don't really see where it's a problem that somebody's like, I don't want a kid, so rather than having one and then treating it shitty, I'm just not going to have one. I don't understand where this mentality comes from that we have a problem with this for some reason. It's a very, very strange thing, and I not really sure where it comes from. Another thing that I want to talk about is preterm birth, right? And I'm bringing this up for a couple of reasons. One, it's a question of like public health and economics and racial injustice and all of these things that anthropology does where it all comes together. But also to dispel one of the rumors, I always have friends, especially when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, um, where women were like, I have to get married now because if I don't, I'm never going to be able to have children. And there is this narrative that like women are kind of, oh, by the time you're 32, you're never going to have kids and you're used up and you don't count anymore biologically. And just very weird things that treat women like property or just breeders. It's very gross. And it's also very much bullshit. Okay. In terms of like the likelihood of like you having a preterm birth or having problems, a woman in their 20s versus a woman in their 30s, the difference is like 0.6%, right? And there's a narrative that there's going to be all these complications and it's so much harder. Really, you see a decrease in fertility of like 1, maybe 2%. And then you see like preterm births and issues. Like again, like the shift is about 0.6% increase in likelihood. That is astronomically low. That is astronomically low. So this narrative that we're shaming women of like, you need to get married right away, you need to get pregnant right away. I mean, yes, technically you are most fertile before 30, but honestly, like peak fertility is something like 17, and I don't think that we should be encouraging young women to get pregnant at 17. So, even though technically, yes, it's very high, it's not as if it just falls off, right? Um, Over 40 is more problematic, particularly 45, I'll be honest. But I don't really see that as like as much cultural pressure as like a woman again who's like, 28, 29, 30, and suddenly it's like there's a time bomb in her life, and it's not really supported much by data, right? Um, However, preterm births, when you break them down by race, do indicate something very bad, which is that um, um, African Americans have much higher preterm births. This is indicative of the fact that prenatal care, access to medical care, doctors in your community, things like that, are extremely critical, right, um, to proper neonatal care. And when you're living in poverty, when you are living in a disrupted job market, when you are in a community that does not have healthcare providers, things like that, it makes it much more difficult to get that. And then it makes it much more likely that problems won't be spotted. They will get worse, and it'll lead to these preterm births, right? Again, this is why the we see the highest amount among African Americans, and we see the second highest amount among Native Americans. Want to guess who the two poorest ethnic or racial groups are in the United States? Yeah, so it is a real big problem that we are not addressing, that we are not really doing a good job with. Even things like look at hospitals, right? Where are the hospitals in town? Are they in black communities? You know, look at the reservation system in the United States. Do we have hospitals on all those reservations? No, right? I lived in California, I lived in Utah. It's really common out west. I traveled around Nevada and Colorado and stuff like that. Really common out west. If you're living on a reservation, you have to drive something like 7, 8, 9 hours easily to see a doctor. You know, um, that's a problem. That's a really big problem. So it's again something that we are not putting the infrastructure into, we are not putting the resources into, we're not putting money into, we're not putting the training into, we're not putting the education into, and that's causing a lot of these issues. Um, the percent of live births delivered by C-section. This is just Rhode Island, but I brought this up because another thing that you kind of hear a great deal about is that we more and more are scheduling C-sections or forcing C-sections. Hospitals like this because it maximizes productivity. This is very problematic. We are not nearly as good at guessing the age of a baby as we like to pretend. Something like a third of children um, born, or over a third, I think it's something like 40%, I can't remember, a very high percentage of children that are born, when we actually look at them, we say, oh, we realize like, oh, we were off on, how long this kid was in there. Also, we often say like, oh, you're pregnant for 9 months. A more accurate description is 40 weeks. However, right, like all biological processes, there is a range here, just like um, body temperature, right? Some of you may know this. That like we often say, oh, 98.7 degrees is how the human body temperature. Actually, it ranges up to like a degree and a half up and down for people. Some people are just naturally they're hotter. Other people are naturally cooler. It's a range. We're not robots. We weren't built in a factory, right? There's going to be some differences between us, and so it's no different with birth. It is very problematic because C-sections are much more dangerous and they're much more difficult and they're much more expensive and there are more complications and there is more deaths and there's all these other problems from C-sections, right? And so hospitals saying like, listen, we don't want a woman coming in here. Like, we want to be able to schedule these things so that like, well, nobody came in yesterday, but today we have 12 women that came in going into labor. Right. Or saying like, you came in going into labor and you got a bed, but then you were in here for 12 or 14 or 15 hours trying to give birth. Let's move this along. Let's do a C-section. Right. And so they're putting cost and money and price ahead of people's health. And that's very problematic. But because of our current system, I also kind of want to defend women who do schedule their C-sections, because we are the only developed nation in the world that does not guarantee paid time off for moms. Every other country in the world that is even remotely developed, countries that have nowhere near our GDP, companies have to provide that, or the government itself provides that, right? In America, you don't have that. So it's really common for women to be like, look, I get 2 weeks vacation a year. I have to have this baby on this date because that will give me 2 weeks to recover and spend time with the child. And when my 2 week vacation is up, my mom is taking her 2 week vacation to stay with the baby. And then when that 2 weeks is up, my husband's mom is taking 2 weeks vacation, or my sister. It's really, really common to do this so that the baby can stay at home with family and things like that before, having to start paying for daycare and stuff of that nature, right? And so you can see where a woman that is like, okay, the baby is due on the 15th. I have to have the baby by the 15th because my vacation starts then. And if that baby doesn't come until the 21st or 2nd or 3rd or something, shit. Like I only get a week to recover and be with the baby. So I don't judge any woman who takes steps that is necessary for her family. I do get a lot more critical when it comes to the hospital sort of pushing that narrative. You'll also notice that there's a real geographic difference here, isn't there? Would it surprise you to learn that southern states have less worker protection, less mandated health care from workers, from companies, things like that? Probably not. Would it surprise you to learn that southern states have less comprehensive sex education in schools? And comprehensive sex education in school is the only thing that is demonstrably proven to decrease both teen pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy, right? And teen pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy are more likely to be preterm births, right? So the truth is, abstinence-only education does not work. Every single study has found that. In fact, it seems to have the opposite. In school districts where they have comprehensive sex ed, you actually see teen birth rates go down, and you see STD rates go down, and actually kids wait a little bit longer to have sex. In communities and school districts where they have abstinence-only education, young people start having sex sooner. They're less likely to use protection, and they are more likely to get pregnant, and they have higher rates of STDs, right? So, all of these things are correlated, right? That's what anthropology is about, is that you can't just look at one factoid. There's a lot of reasons for this. And again, preterm births, globally speaking, as of 2010, I find it pretty pathetic that the company that we are in on this map, respectfully to those countries. But in terms of like money and resources and education and knowledge, the fact that we're in the same boat as a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, that's not good. Like, we should not be that way. We are extremely wealthy. We're extremely educated. We are kind of falling down on the job here. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is abortion. And I know that this is a controversial and very personal topic to a lot of people, but I do think it's kind of worth mentioning. And so I wanted to just lay out some actual facts, because anytime something gets controversial or gets politicized, there's going to be a lot of people that spread misinformation and disinformation about it. You guys know this. And so I did want to hit a couple of facts here, right? One is that abortion has been practiced for many, many, many thousands of years. We actually have writings going well back into the Old Kingdom in Egypt that have techniques for this. There are oral traditions in indigenous populations in South America and Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, of herbs and things that will terminate a pregnancy, if someone doesn't want it, right? So About 40% of unplanned pregnancies, or about 22% of all pregnancies total, um, end in abortion in the United States. Now, this number is a few years old because obviously, with the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade, abortion access has changed pretty significantly in the United States, right? But this was the numbers as of, 4 or 5 years ago, right? Pre-COVID, right? So it is a very, very common way to terminate a pregnancy. It is not birth control. It is not contraception. Birth control, by definition, is something that prevents pregnancy. Um, One of the things that I think we can both agree on, and I'm actually quoting President Obama here, whether you're pro-life, or anti-abortion, or excuse me, I'm getting all my terms messed up. If you're for or against abortion, the one thing that we can agree on is that there should be less. Because I'm a sex educator, and I will be honest, as a sex educator, I'm extremely pro-choice. But if you're having an abortion, it means you got pregnant when you didn't want to be. And as an educator, that tells me that you didn't have the knowledge or the tools to prevent that pregnancy in the first place, right? And so I think we can come together in the idea that, hey, what would actually prevent abortion? And it turns out, through a lot of research done, particularly in Poland, for reasons that are kind of long-winded, we have found that banning abortion doesn't stop abortion. It rarely decreases it even. It does increase the number of women that die getting abortions, that is true, but it really doesn't affect it. What does affect it is comprehensive sex education and the availability of free or extremely low cost contraceptive devices. So, allowing young women access to oral contraception or implants or so-called Plan B pills, men and women both giving them access to barrier methods such as condoms, right? Things like that. Making those available to young people, we find, does not increase when they have sex or how much they have sex, but it does decrease how many of them end up pregnant in that way. So those are the only two things that actually work according to research data from around the globe: comprehensive sex ed and access to contraception. That is what actually prevents abortion, right? Laws don't really. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about with some myths of abortion, just because, again, so much misinformation. Abortion makes you infertile. That is not true. Research shows that it does not affect future fertility capabilities. It doesn't cause problems. It even has found that multiple abortions don't do that, right? So that's just not true. People regret their abortions. Not really. 90% of people who have had abortions feel that it was the right decision, while a much higher percentage of those that are denied abortion access are likely to feel anger, regret, and resentment towards their children, right? Abortion is dangerous. The risk for major complications is less than 1%. Actually having a child is higher than that. Abortions are safer than birth if you look at the number of people that are either hospitalized or die, right? So completing a pregnancy is, even in the 21st century, but especially unfortunately in America, that continues to be one of the most dangerous periods for women in their lives. Um, and women die of it every day here in the United States, right? So yeah. So again, there's whatever. Most abortions are late term, right? That is not true. Also, there isn't like there's no such, medically speaking, late term doesn't mean anything, right? There's no medical definition as to what that is. Okay. But if you're just going to say late term, like, you'd have to define that. But obviously, it means towards the end of the pregnancy. But is it the last 10 weeks? Is it the last trimester? Is it the last half? Right? Medically, it doesn't mean anything, and so it's kind of hard. But if we just agree that it's like later on, that is not true. Over 91% of abortions are performed in the first 13 weeks, right? Because women find out that they are pregnant and they don't want it, and it's like, no, that doesn't change, down the road, right? They usually get it right away, right? And as I said, 90% of them are very glad that they did it, right? If there was, if abortion was illegal, there would be no more abortion. That is not true. Um, as I said, every year, 21.6 million women worldwide have unsafe abortions. Complications from these kill about 47% of women, right? Makes up about 13% of maternal deaths in the childbirth process. Again, making it illegal does not change whether or not a woman wants a kid or not. So it will simply mean that she is going to do unsafe things to terminate that pregnancy, right? And that means that she is going to go to someone that is unlicensed, or is going to try to do something herself, or is going to have to, have unsanitary conditions or something like that, right? Just as it was in the United States for the first half of the 20th century. Um, Again, I hope none of this tells you that I'm not telling you how you should feel about abortion at all. But again, I think facts matter, right? Reality matters, and I also think genuine conversation matters, right? Those that say I'd like to see less abortions. Me too, because I don't want women to have to go through a process, um, you know, for something that they didn't want in the first place that could have been prevented, right? In the same way that I want to see less, I don't know, broken arms in the world or something, right? I would like to see better sex education in schools and better access to contraceptive devices so that people don't have to get abortions. I don't have it on here too, but like, while abortions usually take place among young people, actually a shockingly high number of like married women get abortions because a lot of times they're like, okay, we already have, and actually I have a friend like this. She had 4 children. She got pregnant again, and she was like, I just got my career started back up. She's like, nope, nope, nope. you know, so like it doesn't always fit the kind of stereotype that I think some people think of, right? Abortion is something that goes across racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, lines, right? Yeah, there's some general trends again among like young people and stuff like that that you can talk about, but it's kind of more common than we often think. All right, well, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.